Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever looked at a bizarre true crime story and thought, how on earth does the legal system even begin to make sense of this? Well, today we're doing exactly that. We're setting aside the rigid, black and white letter of the law to uncover the beating heart of criminal behavior. We're going to see how science, sociology, and psychology all come together to help us understand the true anatomy of a crime. Today's fascinating deep dive is entirely based on the brilliant work of Dr. Rahime Erbaş. We'll be exploring concepts from her book Criminology, Suça Disiplinlerarası Yaklaşımlar, which translates to Criminology, Interdisciplinary Approaches to Crime. If you want to grab a copy for yourself or read more about her extensive research, you can find the link to the publisher's page right in our show notes. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1. A staged murder scene, a real-life legal puzzle.
All right, picture this. An elderly woman is desperately trying to evict a really problematic tenant. She vents her frustrations to an acquaintance who steps in, claiming he'll totally solve the problem. But instead of actually helping, this guy and his friends go to the woman and claim they literally burned the tenant's house down, demanding 50,000 Turkish lira for their so-called services. Terrified, the elderly woman takes out a bank loan and pays them. But the scammers realize she's an easy mark, so they lure her to a cherry orchard and stage this completely fake, highly theatrical shootout using a blank-firing gun. To top it all off, they pour chicken blood all over one of the accomplices who's just playing dead on the ground. They turn to this completely horrified woman and say, "A man is dead because of you, and now you have to pay the price." Paralyzed by fear, she takes out a second loan and pays them all over again. Unbelievable, right?
Section 2. The Limits of Criminal Law. Categorizing the crime. Now, this is where the story pivots from a wild true crime thriller into a really fascinating legal puzzle. If you were the judge sitting in that courtroom, how exactly do you legally charge such an elaborate theatrical crime? You think the law is pretty clear-cut, but this specific case caused a massive disagreement between the local court and the Court of Cassation in Turkey. I mean, on one hand, you have fraud, but did staging a fake shootout and using chicken blood to simulate a murder exceed the standard legal definition of mere deception? On the other hand, there's robbery. Robbery requires a clear attack on legal values and the use of force or an explicit threat. Because this was a highly staged illusion of a crime used to extract money, the strict boundaries of criminal law really struggled to categorize exactly what had just happened. Section 3. The Criminological Lens. Looking past the law.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how criminology looks entirely past the legal code to analyze the human element. While the law is hyper-focused on the chicken blood and the fake gun, criminology looks at the victim. Dr. Erbaş points out that the victim's advanced age, her extreme isolation, and her lack of an effective protector made her incredibly vulnerable. It was this deeply instilled fear that empowered the motivated offenders. They didn't just stumble into this crime. The broader social context and the victim's sheer terror created the absolute perfect stageable environment for them to exploit.
And this brilliantly illustrates what criminology actually is. Derived from the Latin word crimen for crime and the Greek logos for science, it is a sui generis field, meaning it's entirely unique. It operates right at the busy intersection of law, sociology, psychology, and even anthropology. Think of it like this. If criminal law is the rigid, normative framework of a house, criminology is the guiding lantern that allows us to actually see the complex human beings living inside it. Section 4. A meeting of many disciplines. Historical roots. But how do we get here? The timeline of criminology is absolutely packed with pioneers. Back in the 18th century, we had the classical school, with thinkers like Beccaria focusing on logic and deterrence. Then, the 19th century brought a biological focus, with Cesare Lombroso. But the late 19th century gives us a truly groundbreaking figure, Pauline Tarnowski. Often celebrated as the mother of criminology, she didn't just sit in an armchair theorizing, she did the grueling fieldwork. Tarnowski uniquely interviewed 160 female inmates, and, crucially, she compared them to a control group of 150 women outside of prison. She used this rigorous data to prove that crime stems heavily from social conditions in our environment, not just some biological destiny, a total game changer. Let's move to Section 5, two global legal traditions, Europe versus Anglo-Saxon. Let's see how this history builds into the modern era, because different parts of the world actually utilize this science quite differently based on their long-standing legal traditions. When we look at continental Europe, places like Germany, France, and Turkey, criminology is largely viewed as an extension of criminal law. It's seen as an auxiliary tool, a dedicated helper designed to aid strict penal codes in understanding the reality of the crime. But in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, like over in the United States or the UK, criminology sits under the massive umbrella of criminal justice. In this view, it's an independent, overarching field that encompasses the whole shebang, everything from the police and the courts to parole boards, rehabilitation, and active crime prevention. The renowned German legal scholar Hans Heinrich de Scheck summarized this delicate, codependent relationship absolutely perfectly. He said, "Criminology without criminal law is blind. Criminal law without criminology is boundless." The law absolutely needs the science to see the reality of human behavior, and the science needs the law to give it boundaries and definitions of what a crime actually is in the first place.
Section 6. The future of crime solving. What drives research?
So, what does the future hold for this delicate balance? Well, to understand the future of crime solving, we have to look at what actually drives the funding, the research, and the focus of modern crime science today. It might surprise you to know that criminology isn't just driven by pure academic curiosity. It is heavily fueled by the state. Governments need to control crime and manage prison systems, which drives massive state demands for penal reform. A prime example of this was in the United States in 1982, when President Ronald Reagan's initiatives fundamentally shaped victim rights studies. High-profile political policies like this inject funding into specific types of research, completely steering the academic dialogue and the focus of interdisciplinary societies across the globe.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from Dr. Erbaş's incredible deep dive into this interdisciplinary science. As we build massive, complex legal systems, we have to pause and ask ourselves, do our modern legal systems rely too much on simply punishing the crime, rather than truly understanding the complex human behavior behind it? It's a provocative question that requires us all to look a little closer and think a little deeper. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer, and we encourage you to keep exploring the fascinating intersections of justice and human behavior.